You think Allah is silent, but the silence is the sign. The ache, the delay, the tightness in your chest, that was Him speaking. You just didn't like what He said. 1. You're not being ignored. You're being protected from a sign your soul would misuse. You keep thinking Allah is ignoring you. But if you could see what He sees, you'd fall into sujood out of shame and gratitude at the same time. Because the sign you're begging for right now wouldn't guide you. It would destroy you slowly, while convincing you that you're still on the right path. Sometimes the most dangerous thing Allah can give is exactly what you want when your heart isn't ready to handle it. And sometimes the silence is the only mercy powerful enough to stop you from running toward what would have shattered you in ways no one could have fixed. You say, "Ya Allah, show me something." But He already saw that if He gave you what you're asking for, you would have used it to feed your ego. You would have mistaken your obsession for a divine sign and your heartbreak for sacred patience. You would have chased someone or something in the name of faith. But deep down, it wasn't about Allah. It was about you trying to turn your desire into a holy plan. And Allah loves you too much to let you spiritualize your self-sabotage. That's why He's quiet. Not to punish you, but to block the very thing that would have looked like a blessing and ended up becoming the reason you slowly walked away from Him, thinking it was love. Because not every closed door is a delay. Some of them are shields, and you don't realize it yet. But His silence is the only thing standing between you and the heartbreak you keep calling a miracle. 2. You're not looking for guidance, you're hoping for permission to keep going. You say you're asking Allah for guidance, but in your heart, you've already decided what you want to hear. And now, every dua, every istikhara, every moment of silence isn't really about seeking the truth. It's about waiting for Allah to say yes to a story you're not willing to let go of. You're not confused. You're just afraid of what obedience might cost. Because what if the real answer means walking away? What if true guidance leads you somewhere your heart doesn't want to go? So you delay. You keep praying with your hands open while your heart stays closed. And in that quiet space where Allah is waiting for surrender, you keep showing up, hoping for permission, not direction. You already wrote the script. You just want Allah to sign it. You already picked the person. You just want a dream to justify why you keep holding on. But that's not guidance. That's dressed up denial. And Allah knows it. He knows when you're using dua as a way to bend the outcome in your favor. He knows when you're not really looking for what's right, you're just trying to make what you want feel right. And He won't participate in your self-deception. That's why the sky is still quiet. That's why your dreams aren't showing you what you asked for. Because Allah doesn't give clarity to a heart that only wants confirmation. You don't need another sign. You need the courage to admit you already know. You just don't want the truth because it's heavy. Because it means sacrifice. Because it means surrendering something that feels like everything to your dunya, even if it's poisoning your akhirah. So you keep calling it confusion. But deep down, it's rebellion disguised as prayer. And Allah is too merciful to answer a dua that would lead you further into yourself. He's waiting for the moment your voice stops negotiating and finally whispers, "Ya Allah, even if what you show me hurts, I'll follow it. Even if it empties me, I'll trust it." Because that's not weakness. That's the strength that makes angels weep. That's the moment silence turns into clarity. That's when real guidance begins. 3. You already wrote the ending, and now you want Allah to approve it. You say you're waiting for Allah's answer, but in your heart, the decision has already been made. You're not asking, "Ya Allah, what's best for me?" You're asking, "Ya Allah, can you please say yes to what I already chose?" This isn't guidance. This is you, chasing divine approval for a plan you've already written from your emotions. You've built the ending in your mind. You've imagined the outcome. You've attached your healing to a specific person, a specific path, a specific timeline. And now, every prayer, every istikhara, every quiet sujood isn't about discovering Allah's will. It's about convincing yourself that He will eventually agree with yours. And when He doesn't, you fall apart. Not because He didn't answer, but because He didn't answer the way you wanted Him to. So now you say things like, "Why is Allah delaying me? Why is He silent when I'm trying so hard?" But the silence isn't because He's distant. It's because He's trying to rescue you from the very thing you're begging for. You're asking for peace, but only if it comes through the door you've already chosen. You're asking for signs, but only if they point to the story you already emotionally married in your mind. And the danger is, even if Allah showed you 1,000 signs pointing elsewhere, you'd still find a way to interpret them back toward the thing you want, because your heart isn't open to truth. It's addicted to a specific ending. And Allah, in His mercy, is not in the business of giving you something that would later cost you Him. He sees what you don't. He sees the heartbreak hiding behind that dream. He sees the spiritual decay that would follow if He let you taste the thing you think will save you. He sees the future version of you, the one who got what they wanted, but now cries alone in sujood because the price was too high. And so He's silent, not because you're being punished, but because you're being protected from your own insistence. This is the part no one likes to admit. Sometimes, we don't actually want Allah's will. We want Him to approve our own. That's why the prayers feel heavy. That's why the signs feel vague. Because He's not giving you permission to self-destruct beautifully. You've convinced yourself this is what's best. You even call it love. You say, "It feels right." But not everything that feels right to the heart is safe for the soul. Feelings can lie. Desire can disguise itself as destiny. And fantasy, when repeated enough times, can begin to sound like divine intuition. But Allah doesn't deal in fantasy. He deals in truth. And truth doesn't always feel good at first, but it always leads to peace in the end. So maybe this silence isn't a punishment. Maybe it's the whisper, "I love you too much to let you destroy yourself beautifully." Because what you wrote as the ending might have looked perfect from your side, but from His side, it was the very thing that would delay your growth, weaken your faith, shrink your purpose, and dim the version of you He's trying to build. That's why the story didn't move forward. Not because Allah didn't hear you, but because He couldn't let you rewrite your destiny around a dream that wasn't from Him. You already wrote the ending. But now, He's gently, quietly asking you to let it go, to unwrite it in your heart, to tear up the pages of what you thought was love, if it came from attachment, not tawakkul. And when you do, when you finally fall into sujood with empty hands and say, "Ya Allah, I don't want anything anymore unless it's from you," that's when the real story begins. Not the one you imagined, the one you never saw coming, because it was being written for a healed, awakened, spiritually mature version of you that couldn't be born while you were clinging to the ending you made up. 4. You want a sign that doesn't hurt, but real signs break before they build. You say you're asking Allah for a sign, but deep down, you've already decided what kind of sign you want. You want something that feels light, something that feels soft, something that confirms your hope, but doesn't shake your comfort. Something that tells you, yes, you're right to hold on. You're not just asking for guidance. You're asking for reassurance that your pain wasn't pointless, that your love wasn't wasted, that what you gave yourself to still has a future. But here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Real signs don't feel like closure, they feel like breaking. Because real clarity doesn't just show you the truth. It tears away the illusion you built around it. You keep waiting for a sign that will ease your heart. But the truth? The sign is the pain you've been trying to pray your way around. The ache, the uneasiness, the way your chest tightens when you try to force peace into something that no longer fits your soul. That is the sign. And it doesn't feel like beauty. It feels like surrender. It feels like collapse. It feels like Allah placing both His mercy and His wisdom in the same moment and asking you to trust the hand that just broke your comfort. But you don't want that kind of sign. You want a dream. You want a verse. You want a feeling that makes you smile, not weep. Because you were taught that signs are supposed to feel divinely magical. But no one ever told you that sometimes the most sacred signs come through something that feels like grief. Because something has to die, for something better to be born. You're not really waiting for direction. You're waiting for a shortcut to healing. But Allah doesn't build through shortcuts. He builds through surrender. So when the thing you loved begins to feel heavy, when the person you prayed for starts distancing themselves, when the chapter you believed in begins to fall apart, it doesn't mean your dua failed. It means Allah heard your prayer, and He's answering it through a truth your heart wasn't ready for. It means He's removing what you were willing to settle for, so He can give you what won't collapse under pressure. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it confuses you. But do you really think Allah would delay your comfort without purpose? Do you think He would make you cry without writing something better into your unseen? That breakdown you're calling silence might be the most merciful answer of all, because a real sign from Allah doesn't always feel like peace in the beginning. Sometimes it feels like a heartbreak that finally makes you let go. Sometimes it feels like the weight that forces you to fall into sujood and finally say, I don't know what's happening anymore, but I trust you. That's the moment the building begins. After the breaking, after the denial ends, after the fantasy dies, that's when Allah plants the seed of something sacred. Not what you imagined, but what you were created for. And one day, you'll look back at this moment that broke you and realize it wasn't a punishment. It was the sign. 5. You don't need another dream, you need to let something die. You keep asking for another dream, another sign, another feeling, another moment that convinces you to hold on just a little longer. But holding on is what's killing you. You don't need another dream. You need to let something die. And you know exactly what it is. You feel it in your chest every time you ask Allah for clarity. You feel it when you speak their name in dua and the peace doesn't come. You feel it when you try to revive a story that your soul already buried. But you keep trying. You keep hoping maybe if you're patient enough, or loyal enough, or desperate enough, Allah will change His decree. And in the process, you've stopped asking for truth. You're just asking for permission to stay attached. But He's not giving it. Because what you're asking for isn't love. It's survival. It's attachment wrapped in faith. It's desperation wearing the clothes of dua. And Allah doesn't give life to what He already ended. You're still trying to resuscitate a bond He already disconnected in the unseen. You're still calling something beautiful when it's already been stripped of barakah. You're still clinging to a version of your life that cannot carry who you are becoming. But here's the truth. As long as you keep asking Allah for a new sign, while holding on to the old wound, you'll keep bleeding in circles. Because it's not clarity you need. It's burial. It's the courage to look in the mirror and say, this thing I loved, this person I waited for, this plan I obsessed over, it's not what Allah wrote. And I have to stop asking Him to change the page just because I memorized the one I made up. Yes, it hurts. Yes, It feels like failure. Yes, you gave your soul to something you thought would last forever. But Allah never takes something from a surrendered heart, unless what He's about to replace it with would make you forget you ever begged for less. So why hasn't He brought that better yet? Because you're still holding on to what should have been buried. You're still carrying a corpse in your heart and asking Allah why you can't feel alive. You don't need another dream to explain what already feels dead. You don't need another dream to justify what doesn't bring you closer to Him. You need to let it die. The illusion, the version of love that made you chase instead of surrender, the false hope you kept protecting even when Allah sent you red flag after red flag. And letting it die doesn't mean you failed. It means you're finally obeying without understanding. It means you trust Allah enough to mourn something without needing to resurrect it just to feel okay. That is a level of Iman that most people never reach. To cry over something and still say, Alhamdulillah. To feel the absence and still believe that Allah's presence is enough. Because the moment you bury what your soul has outgrown, you create space for something real, and you won't have to chase it. You won't have to beg for signs. You won't have to cry in confusion, because what's from Allah doesn't drain you trying to prove itself. It will come with peace, not perfection, but peace. And it can't come until you finally stop asking Allah to wake up what He already put to rest. 6. The Ake was the answer, but you were waiting for something louder. You keep asking for a sign, for a dream that speaks, for a verse that shakes you, for something loud enough to stop the storm in your heart. But the storm was the sign. You wanted it to arrive gently, like a verse that aligns perfectly with your story. You wanted a soft message, something clear, something comforting, something that felt like love. But instead, you were given a silence that grew louder every night, a heaviness in your chest that wouldn't go away, an ache that followed you even after every dua, every istikhara, every forced smile. And you thought, why isn't Allah answering me? But you missed the truth. He already did, just not in the way your heart wanted. Not through a dream, not through a miracle, but through the very pain you've been praying away. The ache wasn't a delay. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't punishment. It was the quiet unraveling of something that was never meant to stay. But because it didn't sound like divine love, you dismissed it. Because it didn't feel like the answer you wanted, you kept waiting for something louder. But Allah doesn't always shout when He speaks. Sometimes He removes your peace, just to show you where you're not supposed to build. Sometimes He lets your chest tighten, not to harm you, but to stop you from settling in a space that would have slowly crushed you. That ache, that discomfort, that heaviness that only appears when you think of them, that was your sign. But it wasn't the kind of sign you could show others. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't written in the sky. It was written inside your soul, and only you could feel it. It was when the person you prayed for suddenly felt distant, when the relationship that once gave you warmth began to quietly drain you, when the future you kept planning started to feel like pressure instead of peace. But instead of surrendering, you kept asking for a louder voice, a clearer sign, a better dream. You didn't want the ache to be the answer, because that meant the truth was already here, and you just didn't like what it said. And Allah, in His mercy, didn't send something louder, because He wanted you to finally listen to what's already screaming inside you, the quiet pain, the hidden resistance, the moments when your soul whispers, "This isn't where I'm supposed to be." That's not fear. That's not weakness. That's your fitra, remembering what your ego keeps forgetting. You weren't created to force a feeling that doesn't come from Him. You weren't created to beg for peace in places He already pulled you away from. And if the ache hasn't gone away, it's because you're still calling it silence, when it was the answer all along. The answer that said, I'm not punishing you, I'm pulling you, but you won't move until you trust me more than your emotions. And the moment you stop asking for something louder and finally surrender to what the ache has been trying to teach you, everything will begin to soften. Not because the pain will vanish overnight, but because the war between your dua and your denial will finally end. And in that quiet surrender, you'll realize Allah didn't ignore you. He answered you in the only language your soul could still hear. When all your fantasies had gone quiet, the ache was never the problem. It was the invitation. 7. Allah isn't giving you a sign because He's turning you into one. You keep asking for a sign. You want direction. You want clarity. You want something to appear and say, this is where you go. This is who you choose. This is what you do. But what if the silence isn't about the path? What if it's about you? What if Allah isn't sending you a sign because He's turning you into one? You've been begging for a message, but maybe you were meant to become the message. Not the person who sees the dream, but the one who walks through the fire so others can dream again. He's not ignoring you. He's shaping you. And that takes time. That takes silence. That takes pain that makes no sense until later. You keep looking for external proof, while Allah is doing internal surgery. He's not just trying to guide your steps. He's trying to reconstruct the soul that will walk those steps with submission, not ego. Because if He gave you a sign too soon, you'd carry it with shaky hands. You'd mistake direction for control. You'd use the answer to run back to old patterns, old desires, old versions of you that He's trying to leave behind. But that version of you, the one that needs constant validation, the one that begs for dreams instead of building trust, can't carry what's coming. So Allah pauses the external world and begins working on the internal one. He lets the people drift away. He allows the plans to fall apart. He lets the questions echo, not because He's cruel, but because He's creating a heart that no longer needs constant confirmation to obey. He's turning you into the kind of believer who can walk through darkness with no map and still whisper, I trust you. The kind of soul that doesn't fall apart just because the door didn't open. The kind of heart that no longer needs signs to be faithful, because the faith has now become the sign itself. That's what you're becoming, and you don't even see it yet, because all you feel is the delay, the waiting, the heaviness, the silence. But He sees something entirely different. He sees a soul learning how to surrender without being spoon-fed answers. He sees you finally letting go of needing to understand everything. He sees your hands slowly unclenching. He sees your heart starting to beat for Him again, not for what you wanted from Him. You wanted a sign, but He wanted transformation. You wanted guidance, but He wanted greatness. And sometimes those two things don't come together, because He's not just answering your dua. He's stretching you to become the kind of person who doesn't need signs anymore, because you yourself will become the sign that someone else needed. Someone else will look at you and say, if they survived that, I can too. Someone else will hear your story and feel hope again. Someone else will watch your saber, your strength, your rise, and they'll stop begging for signs, because they'll see one standing right in front of them. That's why He's been so quiet, because loud things echo, but silent things shape. And He's shaping you to be a voice this world desperately needs, a voice of real faith, a living reminder, a walking sign. So maybe you weren't meant to receive the sign. Maybe you were meant to become it. Let me know when you're ready for Lesson 8, the final and most healing one. 8. The silence wasn't absence, It was a sacred detox of your will. You've been calling it silence, but it wasn't. It was a sacred detox. A divine stillness sent to unhook you from everything you kept calling love, clarity, purpose, when deep down it was only emotional noise. You said, "Ya Allah, why aren't you responding?" But you didn't realize that the silence was the response, not the absence of one, because Allah doesn't always answer with sound. Sometimes He answers with space. Space to think, space to let go, space to feel the weight of everything you tried to carry without Him. And that space, it's not empty. It's where your will gets cleaned. You thought you were ready to be guided, but your heart was still full of plans, still clinging to a person, still obsessed with how you thought things should look, still trying to force dua into a shape that looked like your fantasy. You weren't asking for Allah's will. You were trying to convince Him to approve yours. But Allah, in His mercy, doesn't rush guidance into a heart that still thinks it knows better. He waits. He watches. He holds the answer behind the curtain, not because He's punishing you, but because He's protecting the answer from you. Because if He gave it to you too soon, you'd use it for the wrong reasons. You'd attach to the gift and forget the giver. You'd worship the outcome and call it gratitude. You'd mistake emotional obsession for divine confirmation. So instead, He silenced the world around you to reveal the world within you. And what He found there wasn't ready. It was full of impatience, pride, fear disguised as certainty, love disguised as attachment, dua disguised as negotiation. So He began the detox, quietly, without announcements, without warnings. He started peeling away what wasn't from Him, not to hurt you, but to clean the space where He wanted to plant something real. The silence you kept resenting was actually your soul being emptied of its own noise, so it could finally hear. Because when your will is in control, every no feels like rejection, every delay feels like distance, and every unanswered prayer feels like proof that you're forgotten. But when your will is surrendered, you begin to realize that silence is sometimes the most loving language Allah could use. It says, "Let me be the one who chooses. Let me rewrite your rhythm. Let me teach you peace that isn't built on your conditions." And that's why nothing moved. That's why the signs didn't come. That's why the dream never appeared. Because He wasn't just preparing the path. He was detoxing the walker, you. He was removing the desperation, the obsession, the entitlement, so that when the time did come, you wouldn't mistake the destination as your reward. You'd realize the real gift was the soul you became on the way. A soul that didn't need signs to trust. A soul that could stand in silence and still say, "Ya Allah, I choose you, even when I don't understand what you're doing." Because that's the version of you that can carry the answer without it becoming a burden. And when you reach that point, the silence will break. Not because you begged harder, not because you finally found the right words, but because Allah sees you now, a heart detoxed of its own noise, finally quiet enough to receive. And you'll realize the silence wasn't absence. It was sacred preparation, a divine surgery, the slow undoing of everything that would have ruined what's coming next. And when you finally step into that next chapter, you won't even need a sign anymore, because the peace in your soul will say it all. You thought Allah was being silent, but that silence was Him protecting you, purifying you, emptying you of everything you would have used to misread His answer. It was never absence. It was sacred preparation. Because when your heart finally lets go of needing signs, when your dua turns from "show me" to "I trust you regardless," you'll feel something no dream could ever give you. Peace. quiet, not in your life, but in your soul. And that's when the answers start to appear, not as words, not as people, but as clarity written inside a heart that finally stopped negotiating. Allah heard you. He's always heard you. But sometimes He loves you so much. He gives you nothing you asked for, just to protect everything you were born to become. So stop chasing the sign. Become the believer who doesn't need one anymore. Because the moment you surrender is the moment you realize Allah was guiding you the whole time, silently, lovingly, perfectly.